Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. And it is Wednesday, March 11th, 2015, middle of the week, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday and another crazy weekend here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in the control room, ready to answer the phone when the calls start coming on in. Quick little program note. Tomorrow, our third hour guest will be Marianne Azizi. We've had her on the show before, talking about human rights in Israel. Not the Palestinians, but the Israeli people themselves and some of the abuses they're dealing with. And she's got another example of that, that she's going to be sharing with us. Today, March 11th, happens to be the 21st birthday of my political blogs. I've been doing this for 21 years, and I feel it, too. You can see all the gray hairs. I didn't have all these gray hairs when I started all of this 21 years ago. And it was all involved with the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. I found where the FBI was committing fraud in the testimony. I got blacklisted out of Hollywood. And since I suddenly had lots and lots of free time on my hand, I kept on digging, and the website kept growing, and finally became whatreallyhappened.com, the media empire that it is today. Now then, I want to go back to something they had on the SRN news break, where they're now claiming that the suspect in the Nemtsov killing, who supposedly confessed, is now saying he was tortured, he confessed under torture, so you shouldn't believe what he said. Yes, Putin really did it. And this is a classic example of what happens when you have your propaganda designed by advertising agencies and public relations firms that do not think about the long term. Because by pounding on this issue that we should not accept that this guy is guilty because he confessed under torture, they're undermining every single case where the U.S. claimed to have gotten actionable intelligence from the people the U.S. was torturing. And so it's an absurd claim that Zaur Dadayev, his confession is meaningless because he was tortured, and yet all the people tortured by the U.S., we can absolutely believe every word they said while in between the screaming, so forth and so on. All righty, the U.S. is sending drones and Humvees to Ukraine. They're going to be ramping up more Russia sanctions, and the excuse for that is that Moscow may deploy nuclear weapons in Crimea, which Crimea is now part of Russia, and Russia can put their nuclear weapons wherever they want, just like the United States does. But it's clearly the United States that is trying to amp up this situation. They are so desperate to get a major war going before the economy collapses, so they got something to blame it on. Troops and hardware from the 3rd Infantry Division heading to Eastern Europe, supposedly to protect our NATO allies fearful of Russian aggression. Actually, most of the people in Europe think this is a really bad idea. They don't want a new world war fought on their territory. They've already had 2. 2 is enough. Thank you very much. Another article out of Blacklisted News. U.S. military moves to Russian borders for the first time ever. And this is part of Operation Atlantic Resolve, which is planned to go for 90 days. This is a very long exercise, and apparently some of the places they're going to are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The U.S. is getting their army in position. All they're looking for is an excuse, a big bang. It's probably going to happen in either Germany or Paris to teach them that when the U.S. wants to go to war, you don't stand up in opposition to it. Bad things happen to those countries who don't want war. And Great Britain has sent 20 Saxon armored vehicles. So all the weapons are already pouring in. Now, over in Russia, their foreign minister, Lavrov, is blaming the EU bureaucracy for proposing. Okay, hang on a second. I've got a problem with my microphone again. All right, I'm going to switch headsets. Okay, and we're going to come up here and, can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you loud and clear.
Okay. There is something not working on this setup here, but I'll continue with this headset for the rest of the show.
All right, and here we go.
All right, and I'm sorry for the interruption here, but all of this equipment out here, especially in this salt air climate, it dissolves quickly. I mean, and I don't know exactly what the problem is, but there are some major problems going on here. Let me tone this back down. Okay. It's a bad day on the electronics. So, where was I? Sergei Lavrov is blaming the EU bureaucracy for provoking this confrontation with Russia. And he's absolutely right. Russia's not doing anything. This is all U.S. aggression. This is all U.S. aggression that's going on here. Now, we're already seeing a ramping up of propaganda. Jan Psaki started the other day by saying, we can confirm that Russia is sending tanks and thousands of troops into eastern Ukraine. Now, remember, the OSCE is monitoring the Russian-Ukraine border. They haven't seen anything. But the story is now on to convince you that Russia has invaded Ukraine. They've been saying that for a year without any actual hard proof about that. And I'm looking at the story over at The Guardian. Scale of Russian military intervention in Ukraine revealed, says report. And they're claiming that this Royal United Services Institute has proof of Spetsnaz coming across the border. No confirmation from OSCE, and they're pushing this Russia has invaded propaganda as hard as they can. They are desperate to get this war going, and I think the nadir, and it's very worrying that Quinnipiac poll said that Fox News is the most trusted news network on the air in America right now, and they had Robert Scales, who's a retired U.S. Major General, who came on to the Lou Dobbs show and said, it's time to start killing Russians. And Scales also repeated the claim, there are 12,000 Russian regular troops camped on Ukrainian territory. It's the big lie all over. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here before the commercial break. James in Tokyo, Ohio gozaimasu, what's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. There was a show on American TV. It was called, it's a long time ago, since I was in America, it was called American Justice, where they would put alleged criminals on the TV show and people would identify them. And in your website, when you showed the picture of the guy with the black backpack and the white square who was running away without the backpack, I think that if you can put something on your website asking people, who is this guy, could you please identify him and send it to the Boston police, it might help out the innocent victim in...
No, it wouldn't, because the Boston police are on board with the official story here, and at this point, I don't care who the guy in the black jacket and khaki pants were. The whole point of that graphic that I made up and put on my website today is there is reasonable doubt that the Tsarnaevs are guilty, and it is shameful that Tsarnaev's court-appointed attorney has gotten up there. Even though Dzhokhar is pleading not guilty, the attorney gets up and says, yeah, he did it. They're out to fry this guy, to protect the official story. They know it's a hoax. But what I want to do is destroy... I want to destroy the credibility of the prosecution in the court of public opinion, and that's the reason for that graphic.
I think what this would do, though, is it would show that that guy who's running away is an FBI agent. I would probably bet a lot on that, because it's always the FBI that sets up people like this. And I'm pretty sure that if he could put up something to identify him, and if it shows that he's an FBI agent, it's just going to show that the FBI set up another patsy. That's why.
Well, you may well be right about that, but my view right now is that I want to destroy the credibility of this whole prosecution in the court of public opinion. There is a reasonable doubt, and people have to ask, why isn't Judy Clark showing this to the jury? They've been showed the backpack. Now show the pictures of the Tsarnaev brothers in their gray backpacks. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And again, I apologize for the technical issues we had in our first segment. A lot of this equipment I'm using is actually less than a year old, but the quality of manufacturing and what's available here on Oahu, plus the salt air, and it does wear out very, very quickly, because I'm using it 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And most consumer level audio equipment is sold like exercise machines. They don't figure it's actually going to get used for more than 20, 30 hours before it gets thrown away. And so I'm definitely a power user on this. All right, we're going to grab another phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Not today. My name's not Dustin. I'm your military analyst. It's DJ Bazukowitz.
Okay, DJ, give us the best.
Hey, this Bob Scales guy is a disgrace to the uniform, or, since he's retired, he's a disgrace to anybody to come out and say these things, like, at this time is insane, and they got their talking points. They're all going out on stage, which is the media, and just, spewing this nonsense. It's all if any Russian people or soldiers get killed by actual U.S. forces, I'll tell you one thing, the gates of hell will open, because, Russia can handle any hardware you throw at them. They lost how many people in World War II? 26 million? So yeah. I don't think they're scared, at this point. It boggles my mind how you got Ollie North, Ralph Peters, all these has-been, washed-up military so-called experts spewing this garbage. It's amazing how they're just pushing this ideology that, it's going to cause like a world war.
Well, that's exactly their goal here, because every time the United States gets into an economic mess that they cannot solve, they get out of it with a world war. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Look how hard they're trying to get a major war going, because they know if the economy implodes and they don't have somebody else to blame it on, we, the American people, are going to point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go, Wall Street, that Federal Reserve, and a complicit federal government. And that's why they're trying to get a war. They're desperate enough to try and start a war with Venezuela. That's how desperate they are. To get a full-on real war going that they can say, well, yes, the economy is a mess, but really it would have been it's the fault of the Russians, it's the fault of the Chinese, it's the fault of the Venezuelans.
It's arrogance, imperial hubris. It's arrogance to a point where, it goes back to that American exceptionalism thing. We can do what we want, when we want. We can kill millions of people, and it doesn't matter. Who cares? This is the type of people that we have controlling our government right now. And throw in the mix the money junkies, and it's a recipe for disaster, Mike.
The attitude of exceptionalism that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. is a perfect mirror for what was coming out of Berlin in the 1940s, the master race. We're going to bring ours to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world will love us for it. Same arrogance you saw with the Roman Empire. That we were bringing the benefits of the Roman civilization and viniculture and everything to these conquered territories that we're making so much money off of. And that's exactly it. You don't get world-conquering empires without world-conquering arrogance and conceit to drive it forward, and that's exactly where we are right now. Washington, D.C., and this all comes out of the Project for the New American Century, which basically took as its agenda that the United States was the only remaining superpower on Earth, and we might as well act like it and bring the whole world underneath Pax Americana, whether they want it or not. And look at how many people have died, how many nations have been destroyed, along with the credibility of the United States as a moral leader and a standard bearer for human rights. And it's not going well. And my concern here is, first of all, I'm opposed to war anyway. War means that politicians have failed to find a peaceful resolution for whatever their situation is. Second, I'm opposed to this war because I don't think the United States can win it. Not with the poor quality, very expensive weapons they're investing in. And that means we're risking a nuclear exchange somewhere before Washington, D.C. capitulates.
Mike, we're going up against, people don't realize you're going up against like an army that's equivalent to yours. You'll never see weapons like this again, like in a war, because it'll go nuclear. This is not like Iraq and Syria and Libya. This is an actual real army. That's what people don't realize. This is a real army, guys. They have weapon systems like us.
They got very good weapon systems like the one they tested against the USS Donald Cook, but you're absolutely right. The U.S. is very butch and manly and aggressive going into third world countries that don't really have a whole heck of a lot of a military infrastructure at all, and they're easy to conquer, and the U.S. says, see, we are always victorious. But you're right. Going up against Russia and potentially China at the same time, it's going to be a very different story. And millions, if not billions, are going to be killed. And the only winners will be the money junkies who are loaning money to both sides to fight these wars. And after it's all over, they loan more money to both sides to rebuild from the wars. They have played this scam over and over and over again for the last 300 years. It is time for it to stop.
Hey, Mike, on Crimea, they already have nuclear weapons there. They're on stubs. They're called the Balava.
Oh, okay. I'll take your word for it.
Because, you know, they got the naval port over there, so.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. You're absolutely right here. I'm not up to date on the current Russian submarines. I used to keep track on all of that stuff, but I need to bone up on who's got what and how good they are.
There's a couple of good documentaries on YouTube on the Boré class, the new one that they just got coming out. I think they're on their second one. But
yeah, that's the super quiet one.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And yes, I'm a little flustered from all this technical issues that we're dealing with. I was dealing with my wife's computer earlier today. We'll get into that a little bit later because there's a consumer report connected to that one. Now, getting back to Ukraine. Even President Poroshenko is admitting that the Eastern Ukrainian rebels have, in fact, in accordance with the Minsk agreement, withdrawn their heavy weaponry from the front lines. Kiev hasn't, of course. They drove 5 kilometers back, turned around, and returned to backup positions. But even Poroshenko is saying the Eastern Ukrainian republics are complying with the Minsk agreement. Now, there's a video that we put up there on whatreallyhappened.com. Ukraine crisis, war crimes and atrocities committed by Ukrainian army. Banned on U.S. corporate media, of course, because our side is the good side and their side is the bad side. And they really think that you are so immature and infantile that you will see this black and white world where we're the white guys and they're the bad guys. And it doesn't work that way because most Americans paying attention to what's going on understand we're the United States are the aggressors. We're causing all of this. We're literally trying to build a war with Russia and China to protect the U.S. paper dollar from the ruble and the yuan. And they're willing to kill millions of your children to do it. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to our show here. We're finishing up here with the Ukraine. Article out of Ex-Republic TV. Kleptocrats who run Ukraine economy will grab the IMF cash and run. That's predictable. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation as they head for the borders. We're seeing a little bit of that now here in the United States. All right, we're going to grab another phone call. Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I keep thinking about how untenable and fast any actual war would be between the U.S. and Russia. But I was thinking, you know, the Russians, if there were to be war, all they would have to do is lob 8 or 10 low-yield conventional warhead missiles over some major cities and have them impact out in farm fields just outside major cities, out in the middle of nowhere, and leave some craters in the ground. And Americans would be screaming for their politicians to make peace. You know, like they could just blow some holes in the ground outside of cities and say, now stop. You know, and they wouldn't have to nuke anything. You know, the news coverage couldn't suppress it. It would be getting out there, you know. There's the nice little missile flies right over your city and then out in the middle of nowhere. It blows up and just as a warning shot across the bow as it were. And people would be inundating Congress, the President, everyone to knock it off and make peace.
Well, you know, that might actually work because, again, the reason the people of Europe are cool on this is, you know, the last World War is a real memory for many of them, and they see the damage still around them. Here in the United States, we've not actually had combat on our home soil since the end of the Civil War, and for most Americans, it's this incredible abstraction. And
right.
and believe it or not, when they developed the atomic bomb, Project Trinity, I think it was Oppenheimer who made a suggestion. Let's take the first one and just set it off somewhere in the Pacific and invite the Japanese representatives to take a look. and see if they'll surrender at that point. But Truman wanted to go ahead and bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not only to demonstrate to the rest of the world that the United States had these immense weapons, but that our government was actually psychotic enough to use them, which dominated U.S. foreign policy from then until the Soviets got their version of the nuclear weapon, and the balance of terror was maintained from that day forward.
Even when the Japanese attempted to surrender unconditionally, they weren't permitted to.
No, they weren't. But Truman wanted to drop the bombs as a demonstration to the rest of the world that we had the big stick, and you will do what we say.
Well, France still has trenches. If somebody gave us some craters to look at out in the middle of nowhere, we might go, now we have craters. Maybe we better stop.
Well, I think most Americans would react to that if there was something, that was obviously a demonstration, and our government would simply say, oh, they were intending to attack Chicago, but thank goodness they missed, and the missiles would be off and flying. I would be a lot happier if nobody turned those keys. Yeah, fired anything at all. Unfortunately, our government is just obviously their agenda is a major war. They don't even care who with. To conceal their blame and fault for the collapsing economy. That's what's going on right now.
It certainly does look that way. And I tell you this, if they kick this thing off here in a few weeks in Mariupol, it looks like the OK Corral is going to be Mariupol. I think they're going to just be amazingly surprised once again at what happens. And we're sending armored personnel carriers over there, which to me are going to be like flaming tin cans full of soldiers. It's not a good idea. The survivability statistics, for tanks and APCs and things like that on a conventional modern battlefield is like a handful of minutes.
Yeah, in the battle between the armor and the projectile usually has the advantage. And the other aspect about all these armored personnel carriers and tanks, the people who are inside them don't want to get out. But the people who are on the outside are fighting for their homes and families within eyesight. And they're going to be the more effective fighting force. Look at America's advantage in Vietnam, and it still did not enable them to prevail over people who were fighting for their own country against a foreign invader.
I'd rather take my chances on an open battlefield than in any armored vehicle any day of the week. They have a survival time of like 12 minutes or something like that.
Well, that's not very good for all the money that goes into those things here. But yeah, I know there's some amazing stuff out there that'll cut right through that laminate armor and everything. Anyway, going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And get on back here. Now, not content to be trying to start war with Russia and China, Venezuela, Iran, whoever all else. The U.S. Navy is now deploying experimental undersea drones under the Arctic ice cap, which Al Gore keeps insisting isn't there. And we know that there are massive oil reserves on the bottom of the Arctic Sea. And already we are seeing a lot of saber rattling over who gets access to the Arctic. Now, common sense would say that you start with your northern border and you draw lines up to the North Pole, and that's your territorial water. But, of course, other people are going to see it differently. So there may actually be a major battle zone up in the Arctic for this coming World War. It'll be truly a world war, pole to pole, all the way over. China is showing off its new cruise missiles that they have put into service. The DH-10 land attack cruise missile mounts 3 to a motorized launcher. They're about the same size and shape as the American Tomahawk, have a 2,500-kilometer range, and can carry 500-kilogram high explosive, submunitions, and possibly a nuclear warhead as well. Now, we're seeing this story coming out of ikathamirini.com. Washington is recalibrating its ISIS strategy. And basically what the story is that up until now, Washington has been planting these phony ISIS groups in targeted nations and trying to get other people to do the bulk of the fighting. The Iraqi, the Syrian, whoever. It's not really working all that well. Yes, Iraq is doing really good against the ISIS in Tikrit with Iran's help. But this article is basically saying that the word coming out of Washington, D.C. is for the United States to take a more aggressive front-runner role in the war against ISIS, which is, of course, what they wanted all along, because the whole goal of ISIS is to create this Hollywood-style evil villain and just have them pop up on any nation the United States needs an excuse to attack and invade. And that's what's going on. That's the big lie, the big scam here. Backing up that theory is a story in Blacklisted News, where a U.S.-backed Syrian rebel is now in charge of ISIS in Libya. That's going to be the excuse for the second invasion of Libya. Not that the Libyan people kicked out their U.S. puppet regime, because you're not supposed to know about that, but ISIS is in Libya. We have to go in there. And we're all catching on to what's going on. We know it's a big, gigantic fraud. There's an article over at Activist Post, The Wheels Fall Off the ISIS PSYOP. And it basically says that the reason they're shifting away from ISIS and Iraq and Syria is because they're getting big yawns from the American people, and they're going to go back to Iran and the threat of nuclear weapons. They don't care who the war is with. Iraq, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, it doesn't matter. They just need a big, bloody, full-on war on which to blame the coming economic collapse to save their own jobs. And they don't care how many of your children they have to kill to do it, because that's the way these politicians think. So, anyway, we're coming up on another commercial break. We'll be right back talking about the GOP trying to sabotage the Iran deal. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we are still seeing continued fallout over the letter sent by 47 Republican senators to the government of Iran, telling them that it's a complete waste of time to come to some kind of an agreement with the P5+1 because Obama's only got 2 more years in office, and the next president who comes in will just write it all off anyway. So there's no point in coming to an agreement. Now, Iran's foreign minister has responded, saying this letter has no legal value. He's absolutely correct about that. And it's a propaganda ploy. It's a propaganda ploy. And that's all it is. Now, yesterday we were reporting on a new petition that went up at the White House petition website demanding that these senators and Boehner be charged under the Logan Act for trying to undermine the White House and the State Department with regards to foreign policy. The Logan Act makes it a crime, punishable by 3 years in prison for anybody in the United States outside the executive branch, the State Department, to negotiate with a foreign government. It took almost no time at all for that petition to cross 100,000 signatures. I think it set a new record. So if Obama keeps his promise, and I wouldn't hold my breath, he's going to have to look at the possibility of charging almost half the United States Senate under the Logan Act. This whole Iran issue is starting to tear the federal government apart, which may not be entirely bad. Now, apparently, conservative radio talking head Laura Ingraham was doing an on-the-record interview with Greta Van Susteren on Fox News and literally said it's time to impeach Obama. Congress has to step in and prevent Obama from finding a peaceful solution with Iran. Okay, Laura, here's your rifle. And by the way, I have permanently ensconced up at the top of the main What Really Happened webpage the PDF for the enlistment papers for the U.S. Armed Forces, because apparently over at the U.S. Armed Forces website they took it down. I guess a lot of people are doing this. They're downloading it, printing it out. There's anytime they meet anybody who says, we have to have war with whoever, all right, here, fill out the paper. Let's see the measure of your commitment. Copies of the enlistment form are starting to show up at congressional offices saying, you go first, then we'll take you seriously about the necessity for war. So that document is up there. Please download it, share it with your friends, have hard copies with you. Anytime you hear anybody saying, we must have war with, just whip out that enlistment form and say, okay, if you really think it's that important to you, sign up, have fun. Here's your rifle, here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow, bright orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. We'll call whoever it is you're planning on attacking and tell them you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. But we, the people of the United States of America, remember how we were lied into war with Iraq with bogus claims of Saddam's nuclear weapons, how the U.S. government tried and failed to lie us into a war with Syria with bogus claims about sarin gas, how we were tricked into World War I with the claim that the Lusitania was not carrying weapons of war, which we know now it was, Spanish-American War with the USS Maine, Vietnam with the Gulf of Tonkin. All wars are started with lies, fraud, and deception. And the U.S. is no exception to that rule. Meanwhile, a former Israeli military intelligence chief is also out there screaming that it's time for the U.S. and Israel to have a joint attack on Iran. Okay, well, I'm sure you still have your rifle left over from all the Palestinians you've been shooting at. But what it really all comes down to is this. We have Israel, a country possessing at least 300 nuclear weapons, including hydrogen bombs, and a non-stop record of belligerence to its neighbors, screaming that Iran, a country that's attacked nobody since 1798, should not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. And it's getting even more extreme over there because there was an article on the Israel National News, an op-ed that said it is time for Israel to nuke not only Iran, but Germany to pay them back for all those bad things they did before we were all born. And this guy came right out and said 20 to 30 nuclear bombs will make sure the job gets done. Now, do you remember the big hue and cry the corporate media made over the claim that Ahmadinejad had said we're going to wipe Israel off the map? And then it turned out it was a deliberate mistranslation by memory. What Ahmadinejad had said was Israel will vanish from the pages of history, which is a very passive observation and accurate. No nation lasts forever. So where is the media hue and cry about an Israeli newspaper calling for nuclear attacks on not only Iran but on Germany? Why isn't that offensive to anybody? But they're in panic mode over there. The latest polls are showing that Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party is going to take a shellacking. Their numbers have been dropping ever since Netanyahu spoke to the U.S. Congress. Iran, 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 nuke, 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 bomb, 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 Holocaust, Hitler, Nazis. And Israel's opposition leader, Isaac Herzog, is gaining momentum heading into next week's elections. Two new polls are showing that they've got a lead of 3 to 4 parliamentary seats for the Zionist Union. The Likud will no longer be the majority party, and that means Netanyahu is out of a job. They're in a panic over there right now. And even in the United States, Israel's support is beginning to slip. Illinois Democrat Jan Schakowsky, who normally is a supporter of Israel, but even she is saying, after this speech to Congress, it's time for a regime change in Israel before this really gets totally out of control. Now, do you remember a while back there was a cyber attack against Iran to try and wreck their uranium fuel rod processing plant? Shower the whole area with radiation. There was an investigation into who did it. Well, apparently the investigation is now being put on hold out of fears that any further investigation will confirm that the United States and Israel were behind this. Now, we all know how the Russian people suffered around Chernobyl. We're seeing here 4 years on how the Japanese around Fukushima are suffering. And here we have the United States and Israel intentionally wanting to destroy a nuclear facility in Iran. And who cares if the people around there get cancer and leukemia? That's not our problem. We just have to win no matter what. There really are monsters in this world, and we call them government. Story out of the Occidental Observer taking the Mail Online to task for trying to exaggerate and manufacture an anti-Semitism crisis that doesn't really seem to exist. What they're trying to do is go back to that old idea that criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitism. And that makes no sense at all. That's like trying to defend the Nazis by saying you're just being anti-German. You hate the German people. Hitler didn't do anything wrong. You just hate the German people. So shut up and go away. And we laugh at it in that context of trying to protect the Nazis by saying you just hate the German people. And yet Israel has gotten away with this for decades. Because the media goes along with it and says, oh yes, criticizing Israel's government's actions, that's Jew hate. And no, it isn't. And more Jewish people are starting to stand up and say, look, this government doesn't represent me. They don't speak for me. And it's a good thing they're doing that. Because that way they're going to be spared the backlash when Israel's government finally comes crashing down, as it must. It's destroying itself from within, just like the former Soviet Union, just like the current U.S. government. Now, as I mentioned before, the U.S. government is so desperate for a war with anybody, now they're looking at Venezuela. And it's nothing new there. The U.S. has been trying to regime change Venezuela going back to Hugo Chavez, because how dare they run that nation for the benefit of the nation's people and not American financial corporations. So now Obama, just 1 week after a U.S.-backed coup d'etat was exposed in Venezuela, Obama has declared Venezuela a threat to the national security of the United States. How? What can Venezuela possibly do? We'll have more about that after the news. I found the problem. There we are. Okay, now we're a lot better. Alrighty, yes, welcome to Professional Radio. Yeah, alright, so now. We have a caller on the line, and we're going to go with Stephen in Canada. Aloha, Stephen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Rivero. It's my first time calling.
Yes, I'll be gentle.
And thanks for the show. I always look at the show on YouTube. Yeah. I want to talk about NATO.
Yes.
And what is going on? Why they're peaking on Russia? Always peaking and what's happening? You know?
Well, from the point of view of NATO, like any military organization, they only get money and promotion and toys when there's a war going on. So that's why they're always ready to sign on. But this whole anti-Russia, anti-China agenda is being driven by the United States financial system, which made a huge fortune since the end of World War II by being the owners of the global trade and banking currency, and they don't want to lose that. And they're starting to see countries that are trading their natural resources for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. They're doing direct currency exchanges with other countries without going through the dollar, and that means that's loss of revenue for the American financial system. And it's always been about forcing the world back onto Bretton Woods and the petrodollar. And two obvious examples would be Iraq, which in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar under the Oil for Food program. 1 year later, screaming weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. invades, they lynch Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil's back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. Down in Libya, you had Gaddafi, who was just doing all these I'm sorry?
It's like the dinar. Gaddafi wanted.
Yeah, he had the gold dinar and a state central bank, and he announced to the world that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. So invade Libya, kill Gaddafi. The gold for the gold dinar has vanished. Nobody knows where that went. I suspect someplace in New York. And that's what's driving all of these. That's what led me to write that article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. It's all driven by the money junkies. War is the banker's richest harvest.
But now, the last question that I have, because you see that Russia just signed a military pact with Iran.
Yes.
But you don't know on which side Russia is siding, you know, because they want to put naval warships in the Cyprus.
Well,
so
Russia is taking all the steps necessary to protect their interest against very obvious aggression coming from the United States of America. And remember, back in the 1990s, the U.S. government, the neocons specifically, adopted a policy of the United States as ruler of the world. It came out of a group called the Project for the New American Century. And it basically involved this idea that the U.S., with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. was unchallengeable ruler of the world and we should act like it. And the rest of the world said, no, we're not really interested in that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over here to Kamalu in Hawaii. Aloha, Kamalu. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, hi. I just wanted to disagree, which is okay, I think, about dollar hegemony.
Yes.
The dollar has always been scheduled for destruction. You know, eventually they are going to have to meld America into the Union. So I think I agree with you that they are going to lose the next war, but I don't think they care so much what currency they use. They just want a single global economic system, you know, so it doesn't matter if it's us or China or Russia, they don't care.
Well, you see, the people who want a single global currency, the globo, it's been called in slang, are the same people who are behind the private central banks. And they don't actually operate entirely as a single unit, because each of the main private central banks, I mean, they're all pretty much owned by the Rothschilds and a few other families. But they want their currency to be the stepping stone to the globo because that gives them a financial advantage over the other private central banks. So it's not like there's a single master plan everybody is following.
Again,
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. But again, I would disagree. I watched a economic summit a few years ago in England. They actually televised them. And they were talking about melding all the central banks together and actually creating a union of the central banks. So they're moving in every aspect to create a union, you know, to corner every market. And I think Russia is in the way right now.
Oh, very much so, and so is China.
Right, but we already moved all our industry, all our oligarchs, already moved to China. China is an oligarch-run communist state. And we have the leftover Bolsheviks.
Name me one country that isn't being run by oligarchs.
Well, there's not one.
Yeah, that's exactly. So let's not go scream. They're run by oligarchs. Well, they all are. That's just the reality. All governments tend toward oligarchy, and it's certainly true here in the United States of America. And I'm sure at one point they're going to want the U.S. dollar to subsume to the globo, but at the moment, until that plan comes to fruition, the American-centric financial system does not want to lose that mafia-like piece of the action they've been getting from all the world's commerce by forcing them to go through the dollar as the trade reserve currency. And they do not like the idea that the ruble and the yuan and the renminbi are coming on strong and is seen as more stable and desirable than the U.S. dollar right now.
True, but how do you drag the people kicking and screaming? How do you make them beg for a single currency? How do you set in place the political system, the political will to get people to say, you know what, that wasn't working before, you know, this sort of American model doesn't work.
It's going to be very, very easy, because when the U.S. dollar implodes, I'm sure the private central banks will say, well, it's time to bring on a new fiat currency, debt-based currency, and it'll operate just like the one that you knew before, and your dollars are worthless, and these new pieces of paper with ink on them, these have value. You will believe us when we tell you they have that. And so it's not going to be that difficult. I mean, a good example of that would be back when the silver was taken out of the American coinage, and we got these copper slugs. And the media just kept telling the American people, these are worth just as much as the silver coins. And most Americans bought it. They didn't really understand what was going on. And they went along with it. It was a sufferable evil, to loosely paraphrase from the Declaration of Independence.
All right. They're beating us down, and then they're going to resurrect us once they, you know, slaughter enough people, sacrifice enough to the money gods. And then they'll say, okay, we're here to save you. You know,
Well, we're going to tell them, no, we don't need a global version of the same private central banks that wrecked all the nations to begin with, because the whole point of a global reserve bank system is to permanently entrap all of the humans of planet Earth in permanent debt slavery forever until the sun swells up and swallows this planet. And I don't think that's a future I want to leave our children to. Okay?
Thank you, Mike.
All right. We're going to let you go. We got to take a break for some commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And the phone lines are just really loading up, so let us get some of these phone calls out of the way. Peter in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I totally agree with you that the central banks and the banks overall are basically the wellspring of all evil, all war, all manipulation, from derivatives to gold to mortgage-backed securities to LIBOR to you name it. But even though I heard you just allude just a little 2 callers ago that the Rothschilds basically control a lot of these central banks, that if you look at right now what Jack Lew, our Treasury Secretary, before him Tim Geithner. Then you look at Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan and Paul Volcker. Then you look at all these people. What do they have in common? They're all Jewish and they're all Zionists. Every one of them.
There's definitely a trend there.
More than a trend. It's more trending than everybody acknowledges what the media is like, and it's even more so. And when you have a series of institutions that can print their own money and cannot be audited in any way, tell me who controls everything.
They control everything. They absolutely do. It's the new nobility. And the nobility and wealth have always been tangled up together throughout history. And that's really what it is. The people with all the wealth get to wear the fancy clothes and the medals and the crowns and the gold things and say, I am nobility and that's why I deserve to live like this. And the reality is that they're operating a very predatory banking system. They've been doing it for 300 years. And, it's kind of interesting. Every year we'll see Forbes come out with their list of the world's richest people, and they'll put up a bunch of billionaires like Bill Gates, who I think he's worth $79 billion right now, at least on paper. And what you don't realize is the truly rich of the world do not want to be on those lists. And we're talking about people who are worth trillions of dollars. And if you go and I think the Rothschild family is estimated to be worth $15 trillion right now. And they didn't get it selling fast food or sweaters or used cars or anything. They got it by running these private central banks for their own purposes, and all it took was ink, paper, and the ability to find and bribe members of governments to surrender civilian control of the public currency to private hands. That's basically all it took. And they have reaped incredible fortunes, and I'll tell you what, go out to Google and type in Rothschild's mansions and click on the Images tab and take a look at the houses these people are living in all across Europe. They're living in modern-day castles.
Well, I know. I've actually seen one of them.
Yes.
I mean, at least from a distance. But it's Michael. It's indisputable, really. I mean, they control everything. It's all related. Israel. The Rothschilds funded Israel's founding. They bought up a bunch of land. They financed the Zionist movement. They bribed and browbeat people into the Balfour Declaration. The whole thing.
Yeah.
It's all related.
Well, there's a lesson to be learned from that, and that is that we should not allow any one individual or institution to acquire too much wealth, because inevitably they do bad things with it.
Well, and amongst look at the people like from Ivan Boesky to
Okay, well, Peter, I don't want to turn this into bashing a certain specific ethnic group here. So I want to get to these other phone calls. I'm going to thank you for your phone call, and we're going to switch over here to Paul in North Carolina. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you doing today?
Doing just good now that I fixed my audio problems.
Okay, yeah. No, I can understand that one. It looks like their equipment's just falling apart on you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Again, part of it's the climate. We're a humid, salty environment. The other part of it, of course, is that what you buy in the stores these days isn't really designed to last and be very rugged. But I found the problem now, and we're back to battery.
Oh, believe me, I can relate. I lived a long time in Florida. Anyways, I'd like to address the prospect of, hey, maybe they're trying to heat up the Cold War.
You think? Of course they're trying to heat up. Do you remember what Gorbachev told the U.S. negotiators when they met at I think it was Reykjavik, and it was basically the end of the Soviet Union. And the Berlin Wall was coming down and everything. And Gorbachev said to the U.S. representative, he says, I'm going to do the absolute worst thing to you that you could ever imagine. I'm going to deprive you of your enemy. And what he meant basically was that the U.S. government had been able to extract huge amounts of wealth from the American people by constantly wagging commies at us. Oh, the commies are coming to get you. And then, of course, the Soviet Union collapsed, and everybody said, oh, great, now we can spend our tax money on schools and hospitals and roads and things like that. And, of course, the military-industrial complex didn't want that. So we had a war on terror and a war on drugs and a war on this and a war on that. Trying to find some new mission for the military. We're going to go out and protect the whales from Greenpeace. And some of it got nonsensical. But it is no secret that the military-industrial complex in this country has been longing to bring back the days of the Cold War, where they're just getting all this amazing amounts of money to play with, and all they have to do is wave Russians at us, and we'll throw a snappy salute at the flag and fling our babies into battle. And unfortunately, as we were commenting, I think it was yesterday, this war is already hot because it's already breaking into open combat in Ukraine.
Yes, but you have to heat something up before you can get that Cold War going, though, correct?
I don't think this war is going to stay cold. I think it's already gone past that point.
That's a real good possibility.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when we look back at the Cuban Missile Crisis, things were getting really hot at that point too, weren't they?
But we were not actually in combat with anybody. Okay, it was basically posturing of weapons, and the Soviet Union sent the missiles to Cuba not only in response to the Bay of Pigs invasion, but also because the U.S. was putting nuclear missiles in Turkey aimed at Moscow. And this was their way of trying to get back. And Kennedy was very like Putin is doing today, trying to keep it from going to all-out war, even though most of the military high command at that time said, well, we're going to be fighting the Russians sooner or later, let's do it now. And, Kennedy went to some rather extraordinary steps to make sure that it did not escalate. I mean, in fact, there's some interesting stories about where Kennedy was telling the U-2 pilots, okay, if you get shot down, you are not shot down. And there's a story where one of the U-2 pilots came back with obvious shrapnel damage in his wing. And his commanding officer said, what happened? He said, well, I hit a tree nest. I hit a tree there was a bird's nest in it. I mean, that's the lengths they were going to keep this thing from getting out of control.
Well, certainly, too, but this is a different circumstance.
It's very, very different because there's already fighting going on. And with the exception of Obama, everybody in this country wants all-out war with Russia because we've got to protect the dollar from that evil ruble. All righty, we got to take a break for commercials. Paul, thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we keep hearing these huge thumps coming in from off to the south of us, and there's been a lot of military exercises going on, and I think maybe they're either having live fire something or somebody's breaking the sound barrier much lower and closer to shore than they're supposed to, but it's been a little disconcerting to say the least. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, I wanted to discuss the current economic situation with the meteoric rise of the dollar. This must be Xi Jinping's wet dream as well as Putin's. With this rapid rise, they can now dump the dollar much faster than they were before, and get a lot more for it, in fact. So, they're buying back their debt at meager dollar levels, in fact.
Yeah, you're right. The rise of the U.S. dollar compared to the other currencies is going to prove to the advantage of those who are trying to move out of the dollar. And it's also, of course, it's making it much harder for American companies to be able to export their products because now they're costing more and more. So if this is a full-on currency war, and it seems to be, right now the U.S. is losing.
Well, it is winning in one respect and losing in another. But what, as you say, the BRICS nations now can get rid of their dollars much faster than they were before at a very, very good price, if you like.
Yes.
And this seems to be a trend that's accelerating, that this de-dollarization is picking up pace with the new Chinese direct banking swaps taking place. You know, they've set up this system where you can now send electronically money from nation to nation through their system.
Yep.
And the Russian system is almost ready to go. It looks as though everything is being designed to destroy the dollar.
Well, it's not designed to destroy the dollar because the dollar is destroying itself, or to be more accurate, Wall Street greed and the Federal Reserve are destroying the dollar because no debt-based currency has ever survived for very, very long. What the rest of the world is doing is preparing to go on conducting commerce without the U.S.-centric economic system or transfer system. That's what they're doing. They're not attacking the dollar or the United States. They're simply preparing, they're prepping, if you will, to basically continue business without the dollar and without SWIFT.
Without Bretton Woods, yeah. Well, I'm looking at Ukraine now, particularly Victoria Nudelman's statements recently. I mean, it's laughable. Where does she pull these things from? No proof, no nothing. And yet we've got an extra number of OSDA agents on the border with Russia. They're doing overflights, the open skies policy, and they're saying nothing is there, nothing is coming across.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Right now the U.S. government is playing to that portion of the population that is still trusting of corporate TV news and not getting their news from the Internet, but that's a minority right now. And they're thinking about, we're going to have a new Cold War. They're absolutely convinced that the American people are going to go back to being the trusting, naive sheep that we were in the 1950s and 1960s, where we just automatically assumed that whatever the government and the media told us was true. Those days are gone forever. They're not coming back. It's a whole new world. The people of planet Earth are now realizing that governments as a class of organization should never be trusted, never be presumed to be honest, fair, accurate, or truthful. Government is a necessary evil on a small scale, and as government grows, so does the evil.
The U.S. foreign policy, it looks like it's being run by a bunch of rank amateurs. They're failing in Iraq, they're failing in Syria, they're failing in Ukraine. I can't see anywhere on the planet where they're actually scoring some success. It seems that the U.S. foreign policy is just falling about their ears around Washington, D.C.
Well, a big part of that is institutional blindness, because the policymakers start out with the assumption that if they establish a policy, thus and such conclusion will happen, and it usually doesn't. What's that old chestnut about how any battle plan is instantly obsolete the moment the shooting actually starts? And that certainly is true here. And I think the same thing that has really crippled our economy is also crippling our foreign policy. You have all these individual players pursuing their own particular agenda, and nobody is really maintaining much of an overview of how it's all supposed to fit together and work together. And that's why so much of our foreign policy is self-destructive once it's out there in the field.
Well, I thought that was the policy and what have you is the remit of the State Department and the Presidency, for goodness sake, to keep these things keep the narrative in one direction and
it should be. But right now we're seeing this schism open up between the legislative and executive branches, where the members of Congress who have been bought and paid for by AIPAC are now out there trying to usurp the authority of the White House in order to push the war agenda forward with Iran. And, again, if you've been listening to my show for these last 6 years, I'm not a big fan of Obama. But in this case, he is right and Congress is wrong. And I think you ought to respond to that petition and say, yeah, you're right. Send over the marshals and arrest those 47 GOP senators and John Boehner for violations of the Logan Act and throw them in prison for the next 3 years.
Well, I mean, it's a complete snub to the presidency and the White House, isn't it? Those 47 senators and congressmen who signed that letter.
It was a slap in the face to the White House just to invite Netanyahu to speak before Congress. And it's backflashed on Netanyahu in his own country. It's probably going to backflash on most of these GOP senators. After all this work to try and win back control of the Congress here, 2016, we're going to be making a really big stink about these GOP senators violating the Logan Act to try and push this nation into a war with Iran for the benefit of Israel and the money junkies.
Well, it seems to me that the government, the administration, the White House, the Senate, and the Congress are just violating all the constitutional laws in America. The Constitution, like Bush was claiming, that it's just 4 goddamn bits of paper. It seems to be the mantra.
It shows how much Bush knows about it because it's actually parchment.
Yeah, well, we can forgive him because he's a dummy, as Mr. Bush.
True. Okay?
Okay, Michael.
All right, got to let you go. Coming up on a commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. All right, so we were talking about Venezuela. The U.S. has decided to label Venezuela a threat to the national security of the United States of America. How? How is Venezuela a threat to the United States of America? We've got nuclear weapons. We've got the largest military on earth. What does Venezuela have? This is just the White House throwing a tantrum because Venezuela detected and thwarted a U.S.-backed coup d'etat a week ago. And the U.S. is trying to basically put the onus back on them and to sanction them for human rights violations from the government that has been torturing people around the globe to extract false confessions for political gain. And looking at the way the police are abusing the civilians in this country, don't start lecturing other countries about human rights violations until you clean up the situation here in the United States of America. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program here. We're finishing up with Venezuela. Ecuador's President Rafael Correa is describing U.S. sanctions on Venezuela as a bad joke. And basically is drawing allusions back to previous decades when the U.S. was very much involved in regime change in South America, kicking out governments that wanted to take care of their own people and replacing them, like the removal of Allende and the imposition of the dictator Pinochet. The U.S. has been playing this game all over the world, and that is the real reason other nations hate the United States of America. They don't hate us for our freedoms. Everybody loves freedom. Everybody loves freedom. Only governments and clergy, power freaks, money junkies, they don't like freedom. They want you constrained to supporting their wealth, position, and power. But people around the world, ordinary people like you and I, we love freedom. They don't hate us for our freedoms. They hate the U.S. government for overthrowing their own governments and putting in puppet regimes that will loot their nation for the benefit of American corporations. Whether it's Batista in Cuba, Marcos in the Philippines, Pinochet in Chile, the Shah of Iran. How many times do you have to see this particular type of theater before you realize it's a recurring series? And the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela are being roundly denounced by Latin American leaders. The Union of South American Nations said that they are absolutely supporting Venezuela against outside American influence because they remember the history. of all these coups d'etats and murdered nuns and the rest of it, which, was it Bill O'Reilly said he actually witnessed it, and he wasn't even there. All righty, in response to the oil price war that has wrecked the economies of a lot of countries around the world, Venezuela is starting to liquidate its gold reserves, which it just only got back. It's a good thing they got it back, because if they were trying to get it now, they wouldn't. Here's an article over in Investment Watch blog. National central banks are no longer tools of governments for the benefit of the people. Actually, they never were. They've always been about turning the public currency into a private, for-profit business. It's all they've ever done. This article goes on to basically say governments have become the tools of the global banking system. And that is certainly true. We've seen it here in this country. And again, as they go on and on about raising the debt ceiling, the question is not, should we raise the debt ceiling or not? The real question all of you need to be asking, everybody you know, is, when the Constitution authorizes the federal government to create and issue an interest-free currency, why is that government borrowing that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank, thereby condemning future generations of Americans to debt slavery to pay off that interest? And that is a question the Federal Reserve does not want asked. The federal government doesn't want asked. They are as scared of that question being asked as the Canadians are about Comer. Because in both cases, Canada and the U.S., the government sold the people of this country into the slavery of the private central banks. And they can't justify it. They can't explain it. There's no reason to do it other than they were bribed with generous campaign contributions from the banking industry. Okay. Russia and China de-dollarizing. We already know that. And China is, in fact, now ready to go live with their SIPS payment system that is a parallel to SWIFT. Now, you probably heard on the SRN news break that Germany's attitude toward war reparations to Greece is, it's not an issue. We don't owe you that money. Forget about it. It's not a factor today. Greece is now threatening to seize the property, land, and businesses of German nationals if Angela Merkel does not agree to the compensation for the World War II occupation. And it's not just the occupation. The Nazi occupiers forced the government of Greece to loan Germany a huge amount of money that was never repaid and has been accruing interest. And all Greece wants is for one debt to offset the other. And the attitude they're getting from Germany is, no, you owe us all this recent debt, and the debt we owe you, it doesn't exist anymore. And that is going to further accelerate Greece into leaving the European Union, dropping the euro, defaulting on their debt. There really is no way out on this, because the European Union can't cut Greece any slack on their debt without every other member nation demanding the same. And money junkies will never surrender debt. That's their power over you. You owe me 17 billion euros. Therefore, I will tell you how to run your country. Now, there's an interesting article over at healthandmoneynews.com, and it's talking about John Ramsey, who is a former director of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And now that he is retired, he has gone public saying that, yes, the markets are in fact rigged. Now remember, the Securities Exchange Commission exists to reassure we the people that the stock market and the financial markets are being run fair and square. They don't do the job. Remember, it was the SEC that sat on its collective gluteus maximi for 12 years while Bernie made off with the loot, cheated his own investors out of $65 billion with a B dollars. People like Harry Markopoulos were coming into the SEC with all the evidence that it was a giant Ponzi scheme, gift-wrapped on a silver tray with a pretty ribbon all over it. And the SEC would send some investigators over, and the investigators would give Bernie Madoff their resumes because they wanted in on the scam. And so now we have this John Ramsey, and he gave a speech at a New York technology conference where he basically says he knew what was going on but was politically constrained from doing anything about it. In other words, the political leadership of the United States of America were telling the SEC, no, you're not allowed to point out how the Wall Street financial firms are cheating the people and the nation. Which sort of makes you wonder why they even bother to have an SEC, other than to be able to point at it and say, see, they're protecting the interests of ordinary people. They could actually just have an empty building and do exactly the same thing. Story out of Investment Watch blog again. Treasury resumes extraordinary measures to work around the debt ceiling. And again, this gets back to that question I raised. Why is there even a debt ceiling? The Constitution allows the federal government to create and issue an interest-free currency to buy what that government needs. The currency then flows through commerce without accruing interest and is taxed back in exactly the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That's the economic system this nation started with after we fought a revolution to break free of the Bank of England. So why is the federal government borrowing currency at interest from the Federal Reserve? It's still created out of thin air. There's nothing of any real value. It's still ink and paper or numbers in a computer. Well, they're doing it because the Federal Reserve and Wall Street are very generous campaign contributors every election. And that's the only reason. That's absolutely the only reason. And I would maintain that absent an amendment to the Constitution, it was illegal for the federal government, for the Congress of 1913, to transfer management of the public currency to a private bank. But they did it anyway because those campaign checks are rolling in and we're going to be rich and we don't care if our great-great-grandchildren are broke and destitute because we'll be dead and gone by then. Another very alarming story out of AmericanBanker.com. Global bail-in plan could still leave taxpayers holding the bag. Big shock on that. The poor are always forced to pay for all, one way or the other. They're going to maintain this fascist economic dictatorship where profits are privatized and losses are socialized. That is fascism. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. John McCain's back on the TV there saying, we can't trust Iran. We've got to... Boy, oh boy. Never met a war he didn't love. One more final story out of the economy, then I'm going to take a phone call. Out of Investment Watch blog. Media botches unemployment reporting. Well, they're not botching it. They're being told. Tell the American people there's only 5.5% unemployment, so they think the economy has recovered. We know that's not true. There are 92 million Americans willing and able to work who cannot find a job. But this article points out a major problem. All of the institutions of government are making decisions based on the official report on anything, which means they're making information on bad assumptions, flawed assumptions. And they're talking here about this very alarming story where the Federal Reserve, citing the 5.5% unemployment rate, is saying now's the time to start raising their prime rate at a time when virtually every other industrialized economy is slashing theirs. All right. We're going to go to the phones here. We're going to go to Dennis in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon. Toyota's new fuel cell hydrogen car is going to be on display this weekend at the Hawaii Convention Center at the first Hawaiian International Auto Show, and I thought you might be interested.
I might just get on down there. I mean, they've been running commercials all over the place here, and it would be nice to go down and sort of drool over cars I don't have a chance in heck of ever being able to afford to buy. But it will be interesting to see that.
Also, I wanted to add, the last time I didn't get a chance, according to reliable sources, it takes 51 kilowatt hours to run an electrolyzer to make a kilogram of hydrogen. Now that number, that's at 65% efficiency for the electrolyzer, and that number can be made better by technology and by adding, some people are experimenting with adding things to water to make it easier to split and whatnot. And also I had another couple news items here. The first hydrogen filling station in the United Kingdom is opened in London, and in at a supermarket, Sainsbury's. So those people that say it's just a scheme by big oil don't know what they're talking about. And another development here, Aberdeen, Scotland is trying to make themselves into a hydrogen leader, and they just opened up a new bus refueling station that's run off an electrolyzer. So I thought you might find that interesting.
Okay, I have a quick question here. Is the hydrogen being stored and transported cryogenically or just gas under pressure?
I believe both. I am not certain as to what is going on in Aberdeen, but I believe it's under pressure there.
Okay.
And we're talking about 700 bar, which is 10,000 psi, and Toyota's tanks are rated, by the way, to 20,000 psi.
Well, the part I would like to know about is, hydrogen obviously being a very, very tiny atom. It seeps through tank walls, and I'm wondering what they've done to mitigate that, because otherwise you can put all the hydrogen you want in a tank, and if you go off for a while and come back, the tank will be empty. If you remember seeing the footage of the Saturn V taking off for the moon, how the outside of half of each of the main stages was covered with ice, that's because the hydrogen, which was cryogenic, was seeping through the tanks and the skin of the Saturn V, and water was precipitating out of the air and turning to ice on that. And they literally had to keep topping the tanks off right up until the moment of launch. So at some point, to make this all work, to be able to fill up the hydrogen tanks on the cars and buses and be able to come back in a week and still have fuel there had to be some kind of a breakthrough of a tank surfacing that is that's impermeable to hydrogen, and that's going to be a major trick.
Well, Toyota uses carbon fiber tanks that they've developed themselves, because they originally, before they built cars, they made clothes on looms. And for one last thing before you have to go, I'd like to recommend a guest named Mike Strizky.
Okay.
Mike was written up in Scientific American in the year 2008. And since about 2005, he has run his own solar hydrogen energy system at his house. He built it himself. It's very expensive, but he stores he stores hydrogen in propane tanks. Now, I know you're not going to believe that, but I'll send the details if you're at all interested.
Yeah, please email the details. And yes, you can store hydrogen in a propane tank. The issue is, lossage through the outside shell. And it's hardly confined to hydrogen. I mean, people who are into distilleries, when you put the alcohol in a barrel to get its flavor, you do lose some of the alcohol through the wood of the barrel. Because even oak wood is permeable. And carbon fiber in and of itself, I don't think is going to hold hydrogen. There has to be some kind of an inner surface in there, or there's simply going to be in the instructions that you have to top off your hydrogen tank every day, or it's just going to evaporate into the air. But send me the information. Let me take a look at it. I'd love to see this technology working. But up until now, my understanding, and I'm not up to date on this, I'll admit, my understanding is unless the hydrogen is chemically bound with something else with a much larger atom to it, it's very hard to confine in a space for a very, very long time. I mean, even the Hindenburg, In the days of the dirigibles, they all had to carry hydrogen generators to keep replenishing the hydrogen that would simply leak out through the sides of the bags.
Did you know there was a smoking lounge on the Hindenburg?
Yes, there was. There was also a solid aluminum piano. And the Hindenburg was originally designed to operate on helium, but the U.S. had and still has most of the world's resources of helium and refused to sell it to Nazi Germany. So the Nazis said, well, we'll be really careful. We'll convert the Hindenburg to hydrogen from helium. And with the added lift, they were actually able to add several additional passenger cabins.
Well, I'm sure you got to get going, but I hope you get a chance to go down to the convention center and see the car there. And I'm sure there'll be Toyota people that will be able to answer your questions. And I will send you the details on Mike Strizky. I think it would be a really good interview because this guy, hands-on, knows what he's doing, and he's done it for years. And he's got quite a story. I've read, anyone can see his YouTubes by searching Mike Strizky or Hydrogen House. Mm-hmm. And his website is Hydrogen House Project. And I'll be sending you those details, and I'll be calling in next week with a hydrogen update. Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, thank you very much for the phone call, and I'm going to look at that website. We're going to let you go here. And we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to get back into Hillary Clinton's email server issue. This is not going away, and it doesn't help that already much of what she said in her press conference has been proven to be a flat-out lie. And on that basis alone, this woman should not ever be considered for President of the United States of America. I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of presidents who lie to us, after presidents who lie to us, after presidents who lie to us. They're not supposed to do that. It's not in the Constitution that the government's allowed to lie to you. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and it does sound exciting. But again, and I remember when I was still living in Southern California and the electric cars were first coming out. It's clean, it's pollution-free. No, it isn't, because the pollution is still being created somewhere else to create the electricity to go into the battery to drive the car. And I don't have a problem with electric cars. I'd be comfortable having one myself. The problem is, where does the electricity come from? Either to charge the battery on the car or to create the hydrogen to go on the hydrogen car. Because it still has to be generated someplace. And that usually means an oil-fired power plant. And the more of these conversion steps you have, going from oil to power plant to battery to car, whatever, you're losing efficiency along the way. And even that caller admitted that right now the electrolysis system of generating hydrogen is only 65-70% efficient. And they're nice cars, but we need another clean source of electricity. We know that nuclear plants are badly managed and there's a toxic waste problem. Again, probably ought to be looking more at thorium cycle reactors. And there have been some breakthroughs in the design of solar panels to improve their efficiency. But I imagine if you put up a couple of square miles of solar panels to power your hydrogen plant, you're going to get the environmentalists saying you're blocking the sun from reaching the GMO crabgrass. And it doesn't matter what you do, there's going to be somebody out there with an agenda saying you're harming the world and so forth and so on. All righty, let's see. We want to talk about Hillary's email problem. And this is not going away, nor should it. Now, Hillary's basic explanation yesterday was the private server in her home was for convenience sake, because we all know how convenient it is to set up and run your own server in your home, right? And she is insisting the server will remain private. Nobody's allowed to come look at it. Now, we know that some 31,830 of Hillary's emails have not been sent to the State Department. She says they're all private, personal emails. It's none of anybody's business. Basically, her approach is, trust me, I'm telling you the truth. But there are already some cracks in the story because she's out there saying that, oh, these 31,000 emails I'm not sending, they're, it's me and Bill. And it's since come out that Bill doesn't use email. The White House has now acknowledged classified information went from the White House to Hillary Clinton's private email server. And from there, who knows who hacked into it? NSA, foreign governments. And remember, the reason the White House is now trying to distance from this is it's already backflashing on them. Because remember, Obama tried that lame excuse that he only heard about Hillary's email server in the media. Same excuse he used when the IRS targeting of his opponents came public. And now it's come out that, yes, he was using her email, her private email, ClintonEmail.com. So he had to know he was going to a server outside government accountability. The egg timer's getting worn out on this one. So let's see. Hillary said she emailed with Bill. Bill Clinton doesn't use emails. She lied about that. Lied about not having classified information on the server. And now she wants to be in charge of what gets released and what doesn't. But you know something that got tried before back in 1974? When Nixon said, I get to decide which of the White House tape recordings the Watergate inquiry gets and which don't. And we all know how that worked out. The Supreme Court said you've got to release them all. And they should do the same for Hillary. Now, by now, they've probably purged her server and sent all the incriminating emails to the bit bucket. So there really isn't going to be much at the end of a brouhaha to examine her server. Software to erase deleted contents off your disk is free for the having all over the net. And I'm sure that Hillary can afford to have really good IT experts come on in and make sure that there's nothing on that disk that can be recovered. And what she did was subvert oversight. And that alone tells us she should never be given the White House. Now, with all of this brouhaha going on, people are starting to take harder looks at some of the other things Hillary has been doing. And a lot of the very questionable practices from her husband's administration are being brought back into the light. About very questionable donations, literally selling nights in the Lincoln bedroom to top donors. And now there's a big question being raised about how a top fundraiser for Clinton got a very cushy job at the State Department. Didn't get it on merit, got it on the basis of his checkbook. And all their top fundraisers are getting these nice cushy jobs here. And for those of you who are major donors, major fundraisers for the Clintons, you do need to remember that within 6 months of Bill Clinton becoming president, his 4 top fundraisers all died. 3 from gunshots and 1 plane crash, including White House Deputy Counsel Vince Foster. Basically, the Clintons are playing the standard elitist game. They refuse to play by the rules. At the same time, they arrogate to themselves the right to make the rules for everybody else. And we're seeing that right now with the government. With all this NSA spying, hacking, backdoors into our electronic devices, the government wants our lives to be totally transparent to them, in complete defiance of the Fourth Amendment. At the same time, they themselves demand privacy from prying eyes from Americans who might want to know exactly what's going on inside the government that survives on our taxes and the blood of our children. Now, Associated Press came out with an article, Fact Check. Hillary's email excuses don't hold water. They're absolutely right. And Associated Press is now suing the State Department, seeking access to all of Hillary's emails during her tenure as Secretary of State. And it's now coming out that a lot of other people in the government were using private, non-accountable email servers. Chuck Hagel had one. Eric Holder has one. Department of Justice is saying it's no big deal. Really, it was just for his private emails. There's nothing being hidden over there. Of course there is. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I have one final comment regarding this private email server, which we now know was not being used to communicate to Bill Clinton. We now know was in fact being used by Barack Obama, was in fact carrying classified information. Now, it is the normal practice in this country when you are working for somebody, the entirety of your work product belongs to the people signing the paycheck, which ultimately is the American taxpayer. Anybody working in government, producing any kind of documentation, that documentation is the property of we the people. They do not have a right to hide it, destroy it, sequester it away, conceal it, alter it. That's why there is a Public Records Act. Everything done by every government official has to be tracked. And we have, in the last few years, seen an absolute epidemic of vanishing communications because it's potentially embarrassing, whether it's Lois Lerner's missing hard drive, and we recycled the backup tapes, and the private outside company that did backups, we just let them go. It was a horrible confluence of events. And now, of course, we have private email servers being used by Hillary, by Hagel, by Holder. Secrecy begets tyranny. That's where we are right now. If Hillary had 31,000 private emails during her tenure as Secretary of State, when did she work? That's a lot of private emails. So I don't think anybody is buying Hillary's story on this. And, of course, Hillary supporters are out there saying, oh, you're just one of those Hillary haters. You hate her because she's a woman. No. I dislike her because of how she behaves. And it's not just the emails. It's travel office firings, it's Cattlegate, it's getting fired from the Watergate Committee for unethical behavior. I mean, Hillary's out there launching her potential 2016 campaign on women's rights, and yet Hillary just went on the attack against all of the women that her husband was having affairs with. Not in vengeance or the wronged woman, but to discredit them, to protect Bill's reputation, his career. The highest paid employees at the Bill and Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation are all men. She says one thing and behaves completely another. And, of course, Vince Foster. She has a lot of baggage. And we're already hearing within Democratic Party leadership, they're not so sure she's electable. And they're starting to look for other possible options to run against, presumably, Jeb Bush. All righty. The show trial for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is continuing. And they're basically, the entire case to the jury is, he said bad things. He had bad attitudes. He wrote bad things. He was upset that his brother was killed. Yeah, I would be too. The jury has not been presented anything that actually links Tsarnaev to the bombing, other than his attorney, Judy Clark, saying, yeah, he did it. Some defense attorney. They're going to let you pull the switch on the electric chair? Now, I put together a graphic this morning. It's an amplification about this whole backpack issue, because if you were listening to the SRN news break, the jury has been shown the remains of the backpack that carried the bomb. If Judy Clark were really working for her client at that point, she would have introduced the photos of Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev at the location just before the explosion wearing gray backpacks. So I put together this graphic, and I just bumped it to the top of the main WhatReallyHappened.com page, and I invite you all to copy it off and to spread it across your social media. We are not going to be able to change the outcome of this trial. It's a show trial. It's a kangaroo court. It's a star chamber. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is going to get sent away forever because he's an embarrassment to the United States government. But what we can do is we can undermine the legitimacy of these proceedings in the court of public opinion. Because it's very obvious the Tsarnaevs were patsies. They were set up for in a false flag operation to get us all scared of terrorists in our midst. So if you look at the graphic, you will see the evidence is there. The Tsarnaev brothers, there's a reasonable doubt. And in our system of justice, in theory, you are not convicted if there's a reasonable doubt. And this graphic underscores the reasonable doubt of this entire case. So you may want to take a look at that and send it around. It's a mission for the Rivero's Rangers here. By the way, an interesting video has surfaced of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev shopping at a Whole Foods restaurant 25 minutes after the explosions. He goes on in, he gets some stuff, he goes out. Apparently, a carton of milk that he bought, the ex-date was too old, and he comes back and he exchanges it. Does not look like a guy who is running after committing a heinous crime. He doesn't look like a guy who just blew up a marathon. He looks like a guy who's getting some food and stuff on his way home before he realizes he's been set up by his handlers to be the patsy. Anyway, getting over to Ferguson and the aftermath of the Department of Justice report that said, yes, they behaved badly, but there are going to be no prosecutions. The Ferguson city manager has resigned, and I just got word that the chief of police has also resigned. They're getting out while the getting is good. There's a lot of anger, and there should be. And remember, they're trying to spin this as racial issues, black on white. It isn't. It's an out-of-control police brutality problem against all Americans of all colors, genders, orientations, races, creeds, belief. Black, white, yellow, red, green, brown, peach, taupe, mauve, and plaid. Now, we've been talking about how you are 8 times as likely to be killed by civilian police, wrongfully, than by a terrorist. Well, it turns out that number was wrong. Now that people are looking at this issue of wrongful killings by the police, more and more cases are coming up. We already know that the FBI's estimate is off by half. It's more than twice as much than the FBI admits to. And looking at this article over in Pravda, they're looking at the numbers and they're saying that you, an American citizen, are 55 times more likely to be wrongfully killed by an American police officer than by a terrorist. All right. So, another story, apparently over in DeKalb County. Police officer gunned down a mentally ill, naked, unarmed veteran in broad daylight. He's acting weird. He's naked. That's not justification for lethal force. Cop is on paid administrative leave, and the veteran may have been on SSRIs, and that is also not a reason to gun the guy down. It's amazing stuff here. Everyone's been talking about Al Sharpton's questionable financial dealings, and it turns out that his financial records have been destroyed by fire of suspicious origin, not once, but twice. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here. We're going to take one more phone call today, and we're going to be talking with Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael Rivero. On the Tsarnaev brothers, even though it is a kangaroo court, and knowing that our Congress representatives that represent our state don't really listen to we the people, after calling them many times. I'm thinking, you said you were going to have this information on your webpage about the Tsarnaev brothers. If there was, because there is the show 2020, 48 hours, Dateline, maybe to bypass these individuals are like our government because they don't care and it's already set up. Maybe somewhere there's compassion in the media, and especially if we bombard them, we all know that.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that, but I've been doing this for 21 years now, and what I have heard from people in the corporate media is very straightforward. I want to keep my job, and I'm not going to risk my job to do a story. And I remember I encountered it again when Vince Foster, when I had the actual evidence from the FBI's own forms that they were fraudulently manufacturing the testimony of Lisa Foster. Back then, I had friends in the newsrooms of NBC. They were just a couple of blocks away from me. And I took it in there. I said, you got to look at this. And they said, we can't touch it. It's our jobs. It's the third rail. And in 21 years, I've seen very few corporate media people stand up and have the courage to say there's something wanky with this story, and of course immediately they're escorted out of the building. So I'm not expecting, after 21 years, anybody in the government to do the right thing or anybody in the corporate media to do the right thing. They're just going to go along with the agenda, and I'm sorry, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is going to be fried, and that's what he gets for being an undercover informant for FBI and CIA and the rest of it. But the whole point of the graphic I put up at my website is we can undermine the credibility of this kangaroo court in the court of public opinion, because anybody who looks at that graphic is going to instantly realize the whole case against Dzhokhar is a fraud.
Okay, now where is that information? Is it up at the very top where you have the Oklahoma City bombing and all that other stuff?
Well, it's a big graphic. It's near the top. It's in the regular story article area, and there may be 2 or 3 stories above it. But if you just scroll down that page, it's going to be right there because it's the pictures of the Tsarnaev brothers, it's the pictures of the backpack, pictures of the guy in the black and khaki outfit with the same backpack, and then running away without the backpack. And it's all commented. So it's just all there in one little package looking at why, Judy Clark is there to bury Dzhokhar Tsarnaev in order to protect the official story. And they're going to go ahead and do it. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is as doomed as James Earl Ray was in service to the official cover story. But we can take away... Go ahead.
I was going to say, I see Hillary... I see spooky terrorist, criminal American. Is that it? It's right there.
No, it's with, look for the name Tsarnaev, and you may have to refresh your browser because, I only bumped it to the top over the commercial break, and you want to reload the page. You'll find it. When you see it, you'll know it. Just look for the name Tsarnaev with a text search and you'll find it, okay?
Oh, I see it. Okay. Thank you so much, and that's a shame. He's so young. My gosh, he's like a child.
He is.
Okay, well, thank you so much for
all right.
all you do. You are a jewel. You are an angel, no matter what you think about God.
All right,
so
well,
much.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. No more calls today here. I got a few stories I want to get to before the end of the program here. Now, as you're probably already aware, the Wikimedia organization, together with several others, have filed a suit against the NSA for gross violations of the Bill of Rights in surveilling all of the law-abiding American people. And their biggest obstacle, and we've already seen this used to derail a lawsuit brought by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is the courts are saying you have to prove that you were personally harmed by this surveillance, or you don't have standing to sue. That whole standing issue has become a hammer with which to block lawsuits that risk embarrassing the government. The justice system is not just, but what we can do is just educate the people of the United States of America to the extent to which they're being lied to, in order to take their money, trick them out of obedience, and out of the lives and limbs of their children for these foreign wars of conquest. Apparently, Apple, in addition to the woes over their new watch, are having a problem with iTunes. That system's actually been down. They're losing a huge amount of money on that one. And Kaspersky is out with even more evidence suggesting that the so-called Equation hacker group is, in fact, part of the National Security Agency. Apparently, they discovered text strings in Equation Group's malware that are code names for known NSA programs from its cyber warfare unit. And so if you, like me, have been wondering why the mighty NSA can't find these hackers, they don't want to, because they're in the office next door. Stealing credit card information, stealing bank accounts, stealing business secrets, getting off on naked pictures of your significant others. All this in a government pension plan, too. Wow! Kind of makes you wonder, how could Edward Snowden give that much fun up? But he did, and we're grateful for it here. Down in South Africa, they're looking at a new program to control their Internet that includes basically government permission for any media content. And it's a very loose definition because they're saying the definition of media is constantly changing, new things are coming along, and they're talking about literally needing a government permit to write a blog. Now, down in South Africa, it's already been denounced as completely unconstitutional, but I'm sure buried somewhere in those 300 pages over at the FCC is something along the same line. And now, of course, we're seeing opposition to net neutrality because the big Internet providers don't want it, and they'll probably throw that out, but keep the rest of the other 300 pages to try and control the net because they are scared. They are so scared that you have all woken up, that you see the lies and the deception. And they seem to think that if they can just shut down the independent media, that you will all instantly transform back to the innocent, naive people you were in the 1950s and just believe whatever the government and the corporate media tell you. And that, of course, is dangerously naive. Apparently, the Supreme Court ruled today that federal agencies do not have to follow procedures for notifying the public and collecting comment, changes to policy, and apparently this related to a case involving the Veterans Affairs Department that led to some illness and injury, and the Supreme Court said, no, they don't have to go through the reporting thing. It's just open season on the American people. Article out of IntelliHub, Congressman proposes bill to eliminate the ATF. I'm sure we would all cheer about that, but remember the last time they tried to rein in the BATF-E? Waco happened. They needed a publicity stunt to make it look like we need the BATF. I want everybody to remember why they need us. And they went out to do a gun seizure from this church at Waco that made their money doing gun repair and resale, Texas. And it blew up in their faces, and they wound up having to gas the place with a poison gas that's illegal to use on enemy troops and then burn it all to the ground and bulldoze it to cover up their crimes. Anyway. BBC is still determined to cover up the legacy of monster Jimmy Savile. Any BBC reporters looking at the story are being asked to quit or leave, but BBC is going to prove how butch they are by slapping Jeremy Clarkson around on Top Gear. And by the way, it's already costing them hundreds of millions as syndicators around the world want a refund for the missing 3 segments. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation done to pay some bills. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, make good choices, stay skeptical, stay angry. Please share what you know with everybody you know. Tell them about Genesis. Tell them about whatreallyhappened.com. We need your support to keep on this fight for truth and against war. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.